Tish is a certified family life educator. She's a parent. She's a relationship and trauma educator, and she runs an Instagram page, a popular Instagram page called Hey Tish, where she shares educational and inspirational content for parents and people looking for hope in healing trauma. Today, Tish's presentation is titled Writing Your Own Marriage Story After Generational Trauma, where she'll help you better understand the impact of generational trauma on marriage, recognize your own unhealthy patterns, and teach you new tools to write your own positive marriage story. Tish will be asking you to interact throughout this presentation, so you're welcome to use the chat throughout, and then we'll also hold an anonymous Q&A session for the final 15 minutes where you can hold your questions and type them into the Q&A feature for those last 15 to 20 minutes. This workshop's also approved for one continuing education credit. You can email me at marriagecommission@usu.edu to request a certificate, and there will be a recording available tomorrow, and you'll all be sent a recording of this webinar. So I'm going to give you as much time as possible, Tish. We're so excited to have you here. And yeah, I'm just going to let you get started. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Camilla. We had a little bit of technical stuff. Camilla, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome, perfect. Okay, well, I just want to thank the Utah Marriage Commission for even letting me be here and host this webinar for you guys. I'm super excited. I have a deep love for the Utah Marriage Commission. I just think that they are amazing. So at the end of this webinar, be sure to fill out the survey because that's super helpful for them. And like Camilla said, my topic for this webinar is writing your own marriage story after intergenerational trauma. And we're going to go ahead and get started on that. So a quick introduction. So I'm Tish White. I am a wife, a mom, a certified family life educator, and I'm also a trauma survivor. And we're just going to dive right into it. So we're going to first talk about trauma. So trauma is a thief. I know this because I have personally experienced it. It can obscure your sense of self, and it can keep you from becoming the person that you were meant to be. It can inhibit and get in the way of you engaging with the people that mean the most to you and the relationships that mean the most to you. It can also keep you from writing the marriage story that you have always dreamed of. Trauma can also feel a lot like being stuck or out of control. And we can gain back that control through education and through proper healing. I am a firm believer in education and understanding the why behind things. Understanding the why gives you the power and tools to change. Now, in no way does education and tools replace actual therapy, which I will definitely be recommending at a later time. However, education is a really great starting point and supplementation to therapy. So, because I have experienced and healed significant trauma in my own life, I can tell you firsthand that there is hope and that you can do it too. You can author the marriage story that you have always dreamed of. So here is my invitation to you guys. So first, I want to invite you guys to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because we are human, it is supernatural to want to avoid the things that make you feel uncomfortable. But by doing so, we unknowingly stunt the necessary healing process. And the next thing I want to invite you guys to do is that if you have suffered from trauma, I want you to try shifting your perspective from a victim mentality to a survivor mentality. And a survivor mentality can be so empowering. When we make this shift, negative cycles can be broken and future generations will thrive because you were willing to put in that work. When you heal yourself from trauma, you're healing future generations. When you heal yourself, you take back that power to author and write your own marriage story. So we're going to talk about trauma and ACEs, and we're going to not necessarily define them because that can be really difficult to do. trauma is really difficult to define because what is traumatic to one individual may not be traumatic to another. Every person's interpretation of trauma is going to be different. Trauma is the result of one or more events that are emotionally difficult or life-threatening. Trauma has lasting negative effects on an individual's functioning, mental, physical, social, emotional, and/or spiritual well-being. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences that are traumatic experiences occurring in childhood from birth to 17 years of age. For some people, the influence of childhood trauma or ACEs can be subtle and nearly invisible without lasting effects. And for others, it can be powerful, life-defining, and can cause lasting effects. So as we look at this slide, I really want you guys to keep in mind that I used a really narrow lens. And so if your experience isn't here, in no way do I want you to feel like it's not validated or that it's being minimalized, because every experience is valid. These are just some of the ways that trauma can be present. So it can be present through divorce, verbal, physical, sexual child abuse or neglect, alcohol or drug abuse in the home, domestic violence, natural disaster, war, poverty, slavery, or racism. And then it can be present in some not so obvious ways as well, like negative communication patterns, gaslighting, or bullying, or unhealthy boundaries, or insecure attachments. So what is intergenerational trauma? So intergenerational trauma is trauma that is passed down between generations. And so you can kind of see here, we've gone 3 generations. And starting right here, you can see maybe a parent experienced child abuse and neglect. In return, this parent uses alcohol to cope. They develop a negative, neglectful parenting style, and they project their trauma onto their child. As a result, the child develops trauma due to growing up with a traumatized parent and takes on some of the same patterns as their father. And then the grandchild suffers trauma because of their traumatized parent and grandparent. The negative effects of trauma are passed on through generations. And unless somebody is willing to break that cycle, it will just continue on and on and on for generations. So as we talk about that, it's really important to recognize the importance of family history and to reflect on that family history. Researchers say that at least 3 generations of family history should be explored in order to understand the why behind the patterns of trauma and suffering that keeps repeating itself. So it's really important to get curious, right? And you guys are going to hear me say that so many times during this webinar, to get curious. And it's just such a critical part of healing and beginning to understand how you can author your own marriage story. You know, often we get stuck in negative patterns sometimes we assume that it's just how we are. And it is what it is because it's what we've always known. And we forget to get curious with ourselves and ask if maybe there's a deeper why to our behavior. And you're probably wondering why I have this cute guy thinking about a turkey. I'm going to share that with you guys in the next slide. So there's this incredible talk on TED, and it's by the speaker named Tabitha Kaguri, and it's titled "Trauma Not Transformed is Trauma Transferred." And I'm going to share a little 1-minute clip from this that teaches you guys why it's so important to get curious and to ask why.
a story is told of a little girl watching her mother making turkey and baking it, whatever they do with turkeys. You can tell I don't cook. And so she would cut off the legs and the wings before baking it. And the little girl said, "Why do you do that?" And mom looks up and says, "I actually don't know. My mom always did it that way." Let's ask mom, "Why did you do that, grandma?" "I don't know. My mom did it that way." 3 generations later, great grandma did not have a big enough pot. And so all these other generations were throwing away really good meat. Because of traditions, we didn't stop to question, why do we do what we do? It served a purpose then, it doesn't now. How often do we stop and question the things we think and believe?
And I just really love that example because, when she says, all of these generations have been throwing away really good meat. They've been chopping off the wings and the legs simply because the great grandma didn't have a pot big enough for the whole turkey. And, all these generations throwing away this wonderful meat, missing out on all of this nutrients and all this wonderfulness because nobody stopped to think and ask, why do we do that, right? And this really is a good example of us in our own lives as we relate it to trauma, because when we don't stop and get curious and ask why, we are limiting ourselves. We're limiting ourselves from growth opportunities and limiting ourselves from becoming the people that we're meant to be. So I just really love that example. And in the same TED Talk, Tabitha briefly discusses, passing the baton. And I really loved this because, in life, we're all running this relay race called life, right? And just like runners finishing their leg of the race and passing on their baton to the next runner, each generation passes a baton to the next one. And as you can see right here, I have a genogram. And for those of you who do know genograms, you'll know that this is definitely a modified genogram. And I did that just so that we could kind of simplify it and I could kind of get my point across quicker. But you can see that this is possibly you right here. And we've gone back 3 generations. And as we look at it, you can see that maybe great grandpa was an alcoholic and he was abusive and he had a negative communication pattern and he had some insecure attachment issues and he definitely had an unhealthy marriage. And he took that baton that he had and he passed that on to his son. And his son also inherited some of those negative patterns, being an alcoholic, being abusive, having negative communication patterns, having insecure attachments. And he also took on having an unhealthy marriage. And he took that baton and he passed on to your parent, right? And maybe she inherited some of those patterns as well, being neglectful, having unhealthy boundaries, having negative communication patterns, having insecure attachments, and also took on having an unhealthy marriage. And maybe she passed that baton on to you, right? And maybe you even took on some of those same negative patterns like unhealthy boundaries, negative communication patterns, or insecure attachments. And, the beauty in it is that you get to decide what you're going to do with that baton. Are you going to change that baton? What is your marriage story going to be? Are you going to pass that baton on to your children and then them pass it on to theirs? You get to make that choice. So what baton are you going on? It's not only what we inherit from our parents, but also how they were parented that influences how we relate to our partner, how we relate to ourselves, and how we nurture our children. For better or worse, parents tend to pass on the parenting that they themselves received. Parents also tend to pass on the marriages that they themselves have. The baton that was passed to you may have been out of your control, but you get to choose what you do with it, right? And so I'm going to share these 3 questions right here that I would like you guys to reflect on. And maybe if you have like a pencil and some scrap paper, you can kind of write down your answer. Pull open your notes app in your phone and maybe jot down some notes. But I would like you guys, I'm going to read through these first, and then I'm going to give you guys a minute to kind of reflect on them and answer them. And specifically for this 3rd question, what baton are you going to pass on? If any of you guys are feeling vulnerable and you would like to share what baton you would like to pass on in the comments, feel free to do that. And then awesome Camilla will go ahead and read through those if we have any people that want to share. So the first question is, are you going to let the baton you were given determine the fate of your own marriage? Are you going to pass that same baton to future generations? What baton are you going to pass on? I'm going to go ahead and, oh, that's not what I'm trying to do. Sorry, let me go back, you guys. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys 1 minute right now.
I'm going to run the attendance poll one more time now that we have more people here. So
Okay.
everyone keep thinking, but if you see the poll pop up, you can just answer whether or not someone's watching with you.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so about 10 seconds left. All right, if you guys wanted to share, go ahead and put that in the comments. And then Camilla, if you see anything pop up, you can go ahead and share that. I'll give you guys just a second. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. So as we look at like our genogram and everything like that, we can see that history.
Sorry, I have one person who just shared. If you want me to share that really quick. Okay. So we have someone who said, our family has dealt with insecure attachment through time, but hoping to pass on the hugs and love and quality time that my family had growing up that we still have now. I have a couple other comments that I can read and then a few questions, if that's okay.
Sure,
okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Someone said, I want to break my family baton that was passed on to me. I want secure attachment with my husband and pass that on to my children. Someone also said, same with Cassie, who commented earlier, I've had multiple generations of insecure attachments and I'm hoping my daughter has more empowerment and confidence. And then we also have a question asking, how is the dysfunction of the baton affected by the same sex posterity versus the opposite sex? And does the same sex multiply after several generations? So like mother to daughter, father to son, I think is what the question is referring to.
Okay, so like, is that in reference to like the genogram?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, let's go back and look at that. So really, let me show you. So really, it could be, okay, so like right here, I hope that this is answering your question. Okay, so you can see right here, like great grandpa to the son, right? So I was just showing one side of the family. So this baton, so this is only showing the baton that the dad passed on to the son. So this isn't even taking into consideration what the mom passed on to him. So she passes on her own baton to him as well. And the same. And so it's not necessarily like male to male or female to female, you know, like right here, you can see like that the dad passed it on to the mom. I hope that that kind of answers that and clears that up a little bit. Okay, was that everything, Camilla?
Yeah, we can move forward.
Okay, perfect. All right, so as you guys see, looking at the genogram and everything, we can see that history often repeats itself. So, you know, individuals who have experienced trauma as a child are more at risk of becoming divorced or separated themselves. Through research, there's a significant link between childhood trauma, marital satisfaction, and marital longevity. Studies have shown that adult children whose parents had divorced were more likely to have their own marriage end in divorce. Adult children whose parents had an unhappy marriage but stayed married were more likely to have unhappy marriages themselves. And that seems pretty deep and heavy, right? But on a positive note, the opposite is true too. So adult children whose parents had positive, healthy relationships were also more likely to have those same qualities in their own intimate relationships. And so I think that that really gives a lot of hope and brings a lot of light that, you know, we can make change and we can pass that change on to our future generations. And I feel like we can't talk about trauma without bringing in a little bit of brain science, right? I kind of geek out when it comes to brain science and trauma because I just find it absolutely fascinating. And obviously there's many aspects and regions of the brain that are deeply affected by trauma. But these three areas are some of the main ones. And we're just going to talk about the hippocampus today because we don't have a ton of time. So the main role of the hippocampus is memory recall. And the hippocampus helps you understand if an event happened in the past, in the present, or if it's going to happen in the future, right? So its job is to take the input and place it on a timeline. It places the meaning of an event in reference to where you are at in time, and it almost always does an amazing, fantastic, great job at that, except when someone experiences trauma. Trauma messes up the proper function of the brain and it mixes up that timeline in your brain. So it's more difficult to pinpoint when that event happened or if it's going to happen again. You don't really remember it as something that happened in the past. You remember it as something that could happen at any point, at any time. And childhood trauma really has a significant impact on this region of the brain. When we experience trauma as a child, our brains often don't know how to process it. Our thought process may become disorganized in such a way that we no longer recognize those memories as belonging to a certain event. Instead, pieces of that memory are stored in our unconscious and can become activated later by anything remotely reminiscent of the original experience. This memory can become unconsciously triggered, causing us to react in a way that mimics the past. And there's this really interesting story in the book Raising Cain. And one of the authors, he was working at a juvenile center for boys. And there was this one boy specifically who had suffered a lot of really traumatic things in his life. The main things being that he had a really neglectful mother and that his father was incredibly abusive. And with those things happening in his life, he began to show a lot of really major behavioral issues. So he was sent to this juvenile facility. And this boy was placed in a class, and they noticed that he was kind of doing okay, and they placed him in this class, and they noticed that all of a sudden his behaviors were like tenfold. Like he was acting out in aggression, he was yelling at the teacher, he was getting in the teacher's face, like these horrible behaviors, right? And they just couldn't figure it out. So they brought in one of the authors, one of the psychologists, to kind of see if he could figure out what was happening. And so the author, he sat down with the teacher first, and he's talking to the teacher, trying to figure out what's happening. And as he's talking to the teacher, his brain starts to kind of wander off. And all of a sudden, he finds himself thinking about all these beautiful memories with his dad, fishing and spending all this time outdoors with his dad, and just all these beautiful memories. And then he like reels it back in, and he's like, okay, I'm supposed to be talking to this teacher. Like, why am I thinking about my dad right now? And then it hits him. He recognizes that the teacher is wearing Old Spice deodorant, which is exactly what his dad wore. So that smell was taking him back to all of these wonderful, beautiful memories with his dad. And to clarify, he asks the teacher, he says, are you wearing Old Spice deodorant? And the teacher's like, yeah, I'm wearing Old Spice deodorant. And he says, I'm really curious about this, you know? And so he then goes and talks to the boy, and he asks the boy, he says, what kind of deodorant does your dad use? And he says, Old Spice deodorant. So when the teacher would get into close proximity within that student, that's when these angry outbursts were happening. That's when these behavioral issues got at their peak. It was when the teacher would move in closer to the student. And the reason why he was having this outburst is because unconsciously he was smelling the Old Spice deodorant, the same deodorant that his father used, who was incredibly abusive to him. And it was triggering these angry outbursts, right? And so the therapist was able to recognize this and able to be like, hey, Tish, let's maybe switch deodorants. And it like fixed the problem. They were able to figure it out and fix the problem. But it just really goes to show that our unconscious is so powerful, and it can be triggered by trauma. And sometimes we're not even aware of it. And so that's why it's so important to get curious. And sometimes you need to bring in a professional to help you get curious and to kind of figure out why you're having these reactions or you're having these patterns. And so I just really love that example because I feel like it just works really well with what we're talking about. We're going to talk about recognizing those patterns. So often when people first begin thinking about how trauma applies to their life, it can be difficult to recognize the relationship between their early experiences and adult decision patterns. They often rationalize their behavior as it's just how they are and it's how they've always been. They may even use that as a way to quickly escape the discomfort that reflecting brings, because reflecting does bring a lot of discomfort, right? Like it makes us really uncomfortable. And so what do many of us do? We like shove it under the rug, right? And then we just keep shoving everything under there. And then finally one day we like trip over it and then like fall flat on our faces, right? Because we just keep avoiding it, you know? And at first it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable getting curious and bringing awareness to your own patterns. But with time, it will get easier the more you practice it. Donald Hebb says it best, you know, neurons that fire together, wire together. Our brains are so incredible and they can change, and their connection, the way that it fires together can change. And so I just think that that's really neat. It can be difficult for people who have suffered trauma to recognize what negative patterns they are bringing into their relationship, because oftentimes they haven't had a healthy relationship modeled for them. So they don't even really know what that's supposed to look like. And there are often unconscious patterns that have been inherited. For example, some of the negative generational patterns that can present in a marriage can be, fear of abandonment, constant arguing or fighting in relationships, avoiding conflict at all costs, being emotionally distant, defensiveness, negative communication patterns, not knowing how to repair after fights, not knowing how to express emotion, marital dissatisfaction, reduced intimacy, negative attachment styles, short tempers, hostility towards partners. It's really funny because if you are married, you may have heard this, that the first year of your marriage is like either your easiest and it's smooth sailing and like all bliss, or it's your hardest. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. My first year of my marriage was the hardest year by far. And that's because I brought into my relationship, negative communication patterns and defensiveness and, not knowing how to repair after fights. So when we were first married, we would get into an argument and I would find myself having these extreme reactions to the argument, like screaming. And my husband would be like, oh, like, I don't know what's happening. And he wouldn't be responding. So then I'm like, well, he's not responding. That means that he doesn't love me. He's not yelling back at me, because this is what love is. You sit and yell at each other, right? Definitely not. I had to learn that, and I had to get curious with myself and be like, this probably isn't normal. And I had to bring awareness to those patterns so that I could fix them. So it's really important to be humble and be aware of your patterns. What happened to you as a child was out of your control, and the coping skills and relationship patterns you learned and inherited because of your trauma are not your fault. You didn't choose the baton that was given to you, but as an adult child of trauma, it's important for you to recognize that you are now accountable for how your marriage story is written. You have the power to change the baton you will pass on to future generations. You now get to be the author of your own marriage story, and there is so much beauty in that. So I am going to share with you 7 ways to begin writing your own marriage story. So these are going to be your takeaways, your tools that you can take and apply, okay? So number 1 is find your why. Number 2 is start the healing process. Number 3 is bring awareness to your patterns. Number 4, include your spouse in the process. Number 5, disrupt the stigma of trauma. Number 6, visualize your marriage story. And number 7, be patient with yourself. So we're going to start with number 1. And this is like a little exercise that we're going to do. So pull open your notes or your paper or whatever it is that you have. And we're going to dive into this exercise. And we're going to figure out how to find your why. So as you can see right here, this is going to be your template. I want to blank because blank. And you're going to ask why 5 times, then insert the reason into the first part of the sentence and repeat the process over and over again. And because we're here to break intergenerational patterns, you can put that as your I want to, or if you want to put something else, feel free to put something else. I'm going to share my example with you guys, and then afterwards, I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to do your own. And then, so I'll go ahead and share that. So I want to break intergenerational patterns because I want to have a happy marriage. So then you'll ask why. Why do I want to have a happy marriage? I want to have a happy marriage because I want a home filled with peace and love. Why do I want a home filled with peace and joy? I want to have a home filled with peace and joy because I want my children to feel safe and loved. Why do I want my children to feel safe and loved? Well, I want to have my children feel safe and loved because I want them to grow and thrive. Why do I want them to grow and thrive? I want my children to grow and thrive because I want to heal future generations. And now you can see right here, I kind of color coded that. That is the root of my why. I want to heal future generations. So now I'm going to take the first part of my first sentence. So I want to break intergenerational patterns because I want to heal future generations. And I'm going to go ahead and give you guys just 1 minute to kind of do that exercise. And if any of you guys are feeling vulnerable and you want to share your why in the comments, go ahead and do that. And Camilla can read off a couple of those if we get any. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys 1 minute starting right now. Okay, so about 10 more seconds. All right, if anybody feels like sharing, go ahead and type that up and put it in the chat real quick. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to do that. All right.
Okay, we have one and maybe a couple other will come in just a second.
Okay.
One says, I want to break intergenerational patterns because I want my children to change the world.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that's powerful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. We want our children to be the hope for humanity, right? And we can do that by changing our patterns. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
We've got one more and then I'll let you move on. I want to break intergenerational patterns because I want to know that change is a real thing we can choose to experience. We're not just victims.
Oh, yes, that we're not just victims, that we have the power to make the change. We're survivors. We're strong. I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you guys for being vulnerable and being willing to put that out there. I really appreciate that. And I noticed that. So when your why is big enough, you will find your how, right? So when you really get down to the root of it and you find your why and you make it significant enough and powerful enough, then that's how you're going to do it. You're going to figure out how to do it. So, you know, it's really important to really put a big focus and emphasis on your why. All right, number 2, start the healing process. Taking those first steps towards healing intergenerational trauma can be really scary, right? For each person, it's going to look very different. Maybe it's being the first person in your family to go to therapy. That was me. EMDR therapy is really great for significant trauma and really helps you process that trauma. Acknowledging your trauma and holding yourself accountable to heal it. Changing from a victim mindset to a survivor mindset. Learning the true meaning of your trauma. Taking back control and setting necessary boundaries. Educating yourself. We have the whole world at our fingertips. You've got blogs, books, podcasts, webinars. I mean, everything right at your fingertips. Use it and educate yourself because there's so much power in education. Moving your body through yoga, running, or athletics, doing breath work and meditation. That is one of my favorite ways to heal. And also remove all negative labels and words that have been spoken over you. Hurt people hurt, healed people heal. Be a healer. Be a healer so that future generations are healers. Let's move on to number 3, disrupt the stigma of trauma. So there is a negative stigma attached to therapy, right? We don't talk about it. Sometimes maybe people who, there's the stigma that maybe people who go to therapy are weak because the traumatic things that they have gone through affect them. I can personally tell you, though, that therapy is not for the weak. The visceral and grueling work that comes with therapy and healing is not for the weak. It's for the strong. And some of the ways to do this is to acknowledge that your experience is valid, and to not ever let anybody minimize your experience, to break the barriers of stigma that keep you from getting the help you need. So to remove that stigma, whenever, I just always think of this when I think of therapy, like whenever you're sick, you go to the doctor, right? Or whenever you need like a back adjustment, you go to the chiropractor, or, you go to all these people for certain things. Like when you need help with your mindset or your emotional health, go to a therapist, right? It just makes sense to me. Find your people. As you begin your healing process, there's going to be people that don't believe in you, or there's going to be people who don't validate you or who minimalize you. And those aren't your people. Go ahead and love them, but push them aside and find your people. And the biggest thing that I think is to recognize that your trauma does not make you broken, and to not take on that label of brokenness because of your trauma. And here's why. I don't know, maybe you guys have heard of kintsugi. I am not good at pronouncing things, so hopefully I didn't totally botch that. But it is a Japanese art built on the idea that in embracing flaws and imperfections, you can create an even stronger and more beautiful piece of art, as you can see right here. So like when something breaks, pottery or whatever it is, they put it back together, and they use gold dust to make the cracks more prominent to show its beauty. And the way that this can relate to trauma and breaking that stigma is to let that change in your heart be visible. You don't need to change, you don't need to hide that. You are more valuable than before, not just because of the gold that holds you together, but because of the careful detail that went into healing you. There's so much beauty in that. Do not be afraid to showcase the wisdom and the beauty that formed through your restoration. And don't be afraid to share your restoration with people, because we heal people through sharing our experiences and connecting and being vulnerable, right? Number 4, bringing awareness to your patterns. Carl Jung, who was an influential Swiss psychologist, believed that what remains unconscious doesn't simply dissolve, but resurfaces in our lives. This is what keeps us stuck in those unconscious intergenerational patterns. That is, until we bring light and awareness to them. You can do this by, like I've said, getting curious, right? Also recognizing in real time that you're being triggered, by being humble, viewing awareness as a growth opportunity, not as a flaw, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and turning those points of stress and pain into a teacher instead of something that is limiting you. Number 5, include your spouse in your healing. through research, it has shown that if people who experience childhood trauma have at least one consistent caring person in their life, they have a much higher rate of resilience than those who don't. And the same can be said for those who are healing from childhood trauma. If you have one person, one loving, caring person in your life, your chances, you have a higher rate of resilience. So include your spouse in your healing. Help your spouse understand your triggers and your trauma responses. As you learn your patterns and you do that self-discovery, educate your spouse and kind of help them understand some of those responses. Sorry about that. Okay, be patient with your spouse. 1 second. Let's get back into presenter mode. I'm sorry, you guys, it's super windy here, and so my internet has kind of been sketch. That's okay, we'll just leave it like this. So be patient with your spouse, right? They may not recognize a lot of like the things that you've been through, so you need to be patient with them and teach them the things that you've gone through so that they can understand a little bit better. And also recognize that your trauma is difficult for them as well. I had an experience a year ago. So about 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And throughout this whole journey, you know, I've always had people connecting with me and asking how I'm doing and seeing how it's affecting me. But about a year ago, we were at an event and we got home from it, and my husband said, you know, something really interesting happened. Like, oh, like, do tell, you know? And he was like, somebody asked me how I was doing dealing with all of the health stuff that you've been going through. Like, they recognized that it was difficult for me too. And he appreciated that so much. And it's important to recognize that, like, our spouses can suffer from secondary trauma. You know, they hurt seeing us hurt. So it's really important that we recognize that. Okay, and number 6, visualize your marriage story. Visualizing is when you imagine what you want to achieve in the future and imagine it as if it were true today. Science has shown that we stimulate the same brain regions when we visualize an action and when we actually perform the same action. So the whole fake it till you make it, believe it and achieve it, there's actually science behind that. So here are some steps that you can take to visualize your marriage story. First, visualize the steps that you'll take to get there. Next, picture all in vivid detail. Create a vision board. I love vision boards. I make vision boards for everything. So you can make a vision board and get creative and make it all cutesy and fun, right? Write down all your goals and then set mini goals along the way. So number 7, this is probably one of the biggest ones, and that is to be patient with yourself. Forgive yourself for the things you didn't know and give yourself grace while you navigate the things that you're learning. And remember that healing is not linear and holds no time frame. Now, since we've been talking about writing our marriage story, I kind of wanted to share the writing process. So whenever somebody's writing a novel, there's a writing process, right? And there's 4 different phases. So there's phase 1, the pre-writing process and phase. There's phase 2, drafting. There's phase 3, reviewing and revising. And then there's phase 4, the rewriting. And in our own marriage stories, there is an extensive reviewing, revising, and rewriting phase when it comes to writing our marriage story. And as long as you stick with it, each draft will continue to get better and better, and your marriage story will become more beautiful and more like the one that you've imagined. But you just have to be patient with yourself as you go through this process of writing your marriage story. And I'm going to share with you guys some of the book recommendations that I have for you guys. These are all really great books about trauma and healing through trauma. It Didn't Start With You, What Happened to You, The Body Keeps the Score, and then Raising Cain. And I just wanted to end with this beautiful picture that I really love. And it says, give yourself time. And it's just like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It has to go through a really intense process to do that. And so give yourself time while you make your transformation. And yeah, I think that is it. And we can move on over to the Q&A.
If you could click stop share, it'll, yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Perfect.
Are you seeing the questions in the Q&A?
Let's see. It's a little bit lagging.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say, if you can't, I can read them. There's 2 questions. There's 3 questions in the comment section, and there's 1 in the Q&A. I know that might be a little tricky, but
okay,
yeah.
So I'll start in the chat if that works. Is that okay?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. Hey, perfect. Awesome. Let's see. Do you have some favorite mindfulness or breathing exercises you could share with us? Maybe some practitioners. Yeah, so some breathing exercises that I could share with you. Yeah, definitely. So one thing that I really like to do is, whenever we were talking about healing from it and removing the negative labels or words that have been spoken over us, because a lot of us that have suffered trauma, we've had a lot of words that have been either directly spoken over us and labels that have been spoken over us, or ones that we have perceived by the way that we've been treated, right? And so one of my favorite breathing exercises to do for that is, I like to use guided meditation, and I like to think of myself like on a beach, and I'm on the beach, right? And I'm like sitting there, and I like to bring in all my senses, and I like to think that, like, I'm closing my eyes and I can feel the sun on my skin, I can feel the breeze and the salt, I can smell the salty air, and I can feel the sand beneath my toes. And I'm standing right on the shore, so I can feel each wave come in and crash on my feet, and I can also feel that same wave go back right out into the ocean. And what I like to do is I like to think of like all those negative labels, all those negative words. Those are the waves that are coming in and crashing down on me. And as those come in, I take a deep breath. And then as I breathe out, I like to come up with a 3-word mantra. Either, I am enough, I am strong, I am brave. My most favorite one is I am whole. So as all of those negative things come in and come crashing down, you breathe in, and then as you breathe out, you're putting your positive mantra back out there, replacing all of the negative ones. And then just kind of repeat that over and over until you kind of feel a little bit more peace. That's one of my favorite breathing exercises that I like to do. Let's see. Let's see. How do you do therapy if your spouse isn't on board? Yeah, that's really hard. you have to, I would say, you know, the most important thing in your healing process is that you feel safe. And, you know, maybe you don't have the support of your spouse. You need to find that support from somewhere. And it's important for you to feel safe. So, like I said, find your people and evaluate your relationship. I feel like that's really important, to find your people, evaluate relationship, make sure that you're in a safe place where you can heal. Let's see. When is it appropriate to go to marriage counseling versus individual counseling? That's a great question. So I recommend individual counseling anytime. You know, I think everybody should go to individual counseling. I think it is such a beautiful tool and just helps so much. I think, you know, for example, in my own life, before me and my husband got married, you know, he kind of knew my background a little bit, and he was like, you know, hey, Tish, like, because I love you and I want us to have like a beautiful, healthy marriage, I really think that you should do some individual counseling before we get married. And honestly, like, it's the best decision I've ever made because it was so helpful. So I would say that when it comes to marriage counseling, though, when it would be appropriate is that, you know, when things are feeling disconnected, and I almost feel the same way about marriage counseling. Like, anytime's a good time to go to marriage counseling. You know, everybody has their things that they could use a second opinion on to work through. But specifically, you know, if you notice that it's affecting your relationship in a negative way and you're noticing more and more negative patterns, then that's definitely an appropriate time to start marriage counseling, you know. This one's probably for you, Camilla. Is there a way to get confirmation of this course by chance?
Yes, I messaged in the chat, and I'll just say it again right now as well.
Oh.
You can email me at marriagecommission@usu.edu to request a certificate, and I will send one over.
Okay. Will a replay of this video be available? Yes, most definitely. Is there somewhere I could go to find resources for affordable couples therapy or couples classes? So I'm not sure about couples therapy, but Utah Marriage Commission, guys, for couples classes, get on their website. There are so many webinars, there are so many resources, there's blogs, you can go to their Instagram page. I mean, so many resources, you guys. So yeah, I would just head over to their website and Instagram page. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to sift through the ones that have been answered through other people. Okay. Okay, let's see. We got married with a 3-year-old. It's been challenging to not have the initial alone time, year to couple of years to work things out on our own. It's been 5 years and we put in a lot of effort, individual and marriage therapy. We're both still fairly unhappy and unfulfilled. We have some tools and that have proven to be helpful. Still feels like we're up against a massive wall. Any suggestions of where we could start anew? You know, it can kind of feel like that sometimes, like you're up against a massive wall, and it can feel really overwhelming and it can feel really hard and heavy and difficult. I would say when things feel incredibly complicated and overwhelming, us as humans, right? We love to overcomplicate things. I would say just break it back down to the basics, and where you could start anew is getting back to your roots and, you know, remembering like why, like reminiscing on your love story, the beginning of your love story, where it all started, and thinking about like, you know, your first date and how you fell in love and why you fell in love. And yeah, and just continue with, you know, individual and marriage therapy. And sorry, I'm trying to keep track of it, but stuff keeps coming in. And just, you know, continue, like, look at the tools that have been helpful and just continue to focus on the things that you see that are helpful, and to just continue looking for those things and to look for the good in each other. If you go onto the Utah Marriage Commission's website, there's a lot of really great information that would help you on that topic specifically, where you can, you know, kind of get back to bliss. There was just barely a webinar about, you know, cherishing each other. That is a huge thing. So I would go back and actually watch that webinar because that was a really great one. Let's see.
There's a couple open questions in the Q&A that were asked quite a bit ago. So maybe we could just answer those and then wrap up, if that's okay with everybody.
Yes, that's perfect. Yes. Let's see. Okay, I have a spouse that has experienced significant trauma. My wife has been through a lot. What tips specifically would you recommend on how I can support her? I love that question. So some tips on how you can support her is by being a safe place for her, a safe place for her to come to and to be able to be open with her experiences, and a safe place for her to be vulnerable with you, and to just be really supportive and comforting to her. Also, you know, to educate yourself on, trauma and the way it can affect your guys' marriage. You know, do your work on your end too, to be supportive of her. Yeah, I really like that question. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Are these principles applicable to those with trauma from previous marriages? Yeah. I mean, yeah, these principles are applicable with, you know, I specifically was talking about childhood trauma because it relates more to intergenerational patterns and, you know, the way that it affects our marriages. But yeah, definitely those principles are applicable through trauma from previous marriages, for sure. Yeah. Okay, let's see. All right. Okay, this will be the last one and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So can you tell us how you started your healing journey and what were some of the therapies you tried and what courses you've taken? Thanks. Not sure if you shared. I came a few minutes late. No, you're good. Okay, so how I started my healing journey. So I did kind of share that. I don't know if you caught that, but my healing journey really started before I got married, and my husband really recommended that I do individual therapy beforehand so that I could come into our relationship. You know, I had a lot of problems with like trust issues and like loving myself and stuff like that. And so, you know, one of the biggest things was like, how could I possibly come into a marriage where I'm supposed to love and cherish this person where I don't even love and cherish myself, right? And so that's kind of where my healing journey started, is that I started therapy and learned how to love and cherish myself so that I could do that for my husband, so that I could love and cherish him, and so that I could love and cherish our children. And so that's where my healing journey really started. And the therapy that I tried was just traditional talk therapy. And I found that to be the most helpful for me. At some point, I would really like to do EMDR therapy, but there isn't really anyone locally that does that here where I live. So eventually, I would actually really like to try that. I've heard that there's a lot of really great healing that comes with that. So, yeah.
Okay, I think we're gonna wrap up now. That was just an absolutely beautiful presentation, and thank you everybody for attending and for being vulnerable here and sharing your experiences and your thoughts. Tish, thank you so much as well for being so vulnerable and sharing your stories with everybody. I think this was just a really beautiful presentation. So thank you so much. I'll just reiterate one more time before we log off. If you could complete the survey when you log off, it'll pop up right on your screen. If you need a CEU certificate, you can email me at marriagecommission@usu.edu. And you will all be sent a recording of this webinar tomorrow. So, and also you're welcome to message me with any questions at the same email. So thank you so much, Tish.
All right, thank you. Thank you everybody for being here. I appreciate it.
Bye.